Academy of Extraordinary Creatures, a prequel of the Vesely Academy series. By USA Today, best-selling author Silvana G. Sanchez. Introduction, Drahoslav. There are tales meant to warm your heart, to fill you with hope that love conquers all. This is not one of them. I am Drahoslav, and this is the beginning of my fall from grace. A guardian angel who dared to meddle in affairs far beyond the scope of my divine duty. You may think you know how this story unfolds. Perhaps you imagine redemption waits at the end of my path. Let me spare you the illusion. What transpires in these pages leads to my damnation, to the very loss of my wings. But before you turn away, know that even in the depths of my disgrace, I discovered something far more precious than divine purpose. A love that would shatter the barriers between heaven and hell. If you seek a tale where good triumphs and evil meets swift justice, I suggest you look elsewhere. But if you dare to witness how an angel of God became entangled in a vampire's revenge, how a guardian meant to protect humanity chose instead to steal a soul from hell, then stay. Watch as I exchange my celestial wings for the darkness that would claim me. The price of forbidden love is steep. I paid for it in full. Welcome to Vesely Academy. Prologue, the scholarship. No mortal had ever noticed the angel, perched atop Vesely Academy's highest tower. Drahos preferred it that way. From this vantage point, he could fulfill his duties as guardian, while maintaining the distance that centuries of watching over humans had taught him was wise. Yet something about the letter in his hand gave him pause. He smoothed the thick parchment between his fingers, examining once more the prestigious letterhead and flowing script that would forever change one young woman's life. Dear Miss Emma Summers, we are pleased to offer you a full scholarship to Vesely Academy. The words seemed innocent enough, but Drahos knew better. In his countless years as guardian, he'd witnessed how fate often disguised itself in mundane details. A chance meeting, a missed connection, or in this case, an unexpected letter. He lifted his gaze across the ocean, past the mortal realm's boundaries, to where this letter would soon arrive, in Austin, Texas. His enhanced vision allowed him to observe Emma checking her mailbox, just as she did every afternoon after her shift at the local bookstore. Today would be different. The girl had no idea she possessed magic. How could she? The truth of her lineage had been buried for centuries, lost to time and tragedy. But power like hers couldn't remain dormant forever. A soft rustle of feathers drew his attention. Kurt materialized beside him, uninvited as always. "Is it done?" the vampire asked, his light blue eyes fixed on the scene unfolding continents away. "The letter will reach her today." Drahos didn't bother hiding his disapproval, though I still question the wisdom of this plan. "You question much these days, old friend." Kurt's lips curved into a knowing smile. "But some things are beyond even a guardian's understanding." Drahos watched as Emma discovered the letter, her green eyes widening as she read its contents. Her hands trembled slightly. Perhaps some deep part of her sensed the weight of this moment. "She looks just like her," Kurt whispered, an edge of longing in his voice. "She is not Mary." Drahos's wings shifted restlessly. "Whatever you're planning." "I'm planning to right an ancient wrong." Kurt's voice hardened. "You of all beings should understand that sometimes the end justifies the means." Drahos said nothing, but his grip tightened on the stone parapet. Below, students filed into the academy's courtyard, unaware of the forces gathering above them. Soon Emma would join their ranks, another piece moving in position on a chessboard centuries in the making. "Watch over her," Kurt said finally. "That's all I ask." Before Drahos could respond, the vampire had vanished, leaving only a whisper of cold air behind. The guardian turned his attention back to Emma, who was already rushing inside to tell her aunt the news. "I will watch," he murmured, "and I pray we don't come to regret this day." Chapter 1. The Stone Bridge. Belleview Cafe, Charles Bridge, Prague. It used to be called the Stone Bridge long ago. No one remembered the old name. Year after year, tourists crammed the majestic platform. Imposing statues safeguarded the city's crossing, standing on the grand balustrade with impassive stone-carved eyes. Saints and warriors, each one of them. Being in their heraldic presence aroused a powerful surge of emotions in every man and every woman who faced them for the first time. Kurt had a keen eye for detail. It was his attention to human behavior that had compelled him to the Belleview Cafe each Friday night for the past 6 months. "Vasha kava," your coffee. The waiter banged cup and dish against the table, with no aims at discourtesy. Drahoslav, the waiter, distinguished himself as a man with a rather blunt personality. This had become their ritual. Drahoslav tossed the coffee before him, and he, in exchange, refused to drink a single drop of it. Their special relationship had been established early on, when Kurt had first settled in Prague. But tonight, an obvious difference emerged from his cup. It was empty. Well, almost. Kurt held it by the porcelain handle and turned it upside down. A carefully folded piece of paper fell onto the small saucer. Curiosity bound him. He picked up the paper and opened it to reveal a simple note in elaborate handwriting. "Join me." The words on the paper blurred as Kurt's mind drifted to 6 months ago, to his first evening watching the new students arrive at Vesely Academy. He'd been perched on the Charles Bridge, his usual hunting ground, when Drahos appeared beside him. "She's here," the guardian had said. Through the evening fog, Kurt spotted a young woman dragging her suitcase across the bridge, pausing every few steps to consult a wrinkled map. When she looked up at one of the statues, he nearly staggered. Those eyes, that gentle curve of her mouth when she smiled, even the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Every gesture was Mary's. 3 centuries of waiting, tracking her bloodline, orchestrating the scholarship. And now here she was. Kurt gripped the stone parapet, fighting the urge to approach her. Emma Summers, the name he'd waited centuries to speak again. A week later, he watched her settle into a routine. Classes at Vesely, then coffee at Belleview Cafe where she would study. Frustrated furrow in her brow as she practiced subtle hand movements from spells and incantations. Mary had worn that same expression when practicing her craft in secret. "Soon," he whispered, breath misting in the cold air. Emma suddenly looked up, as if sensing his presence. Kurt melted into the shadows, but not before catching one last glimpse of those familiar eyes. Drahoslav remained beside his table. He gave a quick pat on Kurt's arm with the back of his hand. "Who sent it?" Kurt looked at the restless waiter, knitting his brow. "Who do you think?" Drahoslav huffed. "Goldilocks over there. She sent it." Kurt's glance went to the Bellevue Cafe's terrace, where bright blue eyes and a charming smile greeted his stare. Chapter 2. The Angel. A mandatory stop on her way home after school, the Bellevue Cafe was usually packed with tourists and locals on the hunt for a spot on the terrace because of its enchanting view of the Vltava River. Emma relished her walk across the Charles Bridge. By that time, its Gothic gas lamps glowed in ethereal luminescence, which she found so alluring. To pass by the bridge under its vigilant guardian's eternal stare, surely, was the closest thing to magic anyone could ever experience. She had searched for it for years, but magic somehow had seemed to elude her. Sheer luck had delivered her to this part of Europe, a free scholarship to the most prestigious academy, for extraordinary creatures had appeared in her mailbox one day. There had been no mention of the reasons that had made her eligible to such a wonderful opportunity, and she'd had no mind to second-guess her fortune. Emma had emailed back immediately, accepting the offer. She was on a flight to Prague the very next weekend. Auntie Lisa had said it was a blessing, and blessings should never be discarded. She was a freshman at Vesely Academy, a straight-A student in most classes, but a complete failure at the actual casting of spells. "It's not in your blood," people would say. "You don't have what it takes. You should pack up and leave." Although it was painful to hear those harsh remarks from her classmates, Emma tried her best to push them aside, and in those times she reminded herself of the reason that kept her here. She wanted to learn magic, to become so intricately familiar with it that it may open her life to a world of discoveries. Sometimes while she practiced, she could feel the energy inside her sizzle in her veins, travel through her limbs. But ultimately, all spells failed. There was no enchantment or incantation that would build up to any visible result. Perhaps her classmates were right. Perhaps it wasn't in her, no matter how hard she tried. Few people were born into the world with the gift. It was well known. Emma settled in the chair, her eyes inevitably drawn to the man sitting some tables away. What about him? Did he experience magic as well, she wondered? For 6 months, she had seen him every Friday night, always skulking in the darkest corner, deep inside the quaint coffee shop, while she opted for the exterior tables at street level. Sullen and detached, observant of all events that in this shop occurred, he was no different from any of the bridge's statues. She wanted his gaze to land on her, and sometimes it did, but never as long as she hoped. So tonight, she'd mustered her American courage, tore off a piece of paper from her notebook, and scribbled a few words for his pretty light blue eyes to read. "Here he comes," she mused, shaking her glass of red wine. "Yummy." 6 feet tall, with ashen blonde short hair and a confident strut, he moved between the small round tables, and his sexy gaze fixed on her. At last. "I have to ask," he said in a low, velvety voice with a subtle accent as he slid into the chair beside her. "Do you normally lure strangers to your table, or is this a one-time thing?" He gave her an enticing smile, shy, but taunting. "Are you kidding me?" she teased nervously. "I do it all the time." She got a short, quiet laugh from him. "Perfect. Besides, you're not a stranger. We've seen enough of each other over the past few months. Wouldn't you say?" He agreed with a slight nod. "Your name is Kurt Engel, right?" Blunt, but it was a start. His eyes flew open. She found not a trace of astonishment in them, but delight beyond any measure. "It is," he said. He was a man of scarce words, wasn't he? "Don't be too shocked." Emma set her wineglass on the table. "I once heard the waiter mention your name to the Belleview's owner. Engel. It's German, isn't it? It means angel. Am I right?" "Yes, it does." "You seem to know many things, Miss Emma Summers." Her name burst from her mouth as her hand crossed above the small table to shake his. Kurt's soft fingers fastened around her hand and with gentle care turned it over and drew it close enough to his full lips and nose that only his cool breath kissed her skin. Her blood quickened that very instant. It could hardly be blamed on the wine. She hadn't touched it all evening. "Oh my," she said, feeling her face grow warm. "You're such a gentleman. You don't see that these days." Why had she placed herself in such a difficult position? The man might not have spoken much, but his actions had taken fast hold of her heart. "I think I'm falling for him." Chapter 3. The Gargoyle. "I should go," Emma said, retrieving her hand. Had he done something wrong? A sudden restlessness built up inside Kurt. He needed things to develop smoothly between them. Had he rushed this meeting, perhaps? 6 months had seemed an appropriate time, he'd thought. Waiting that long had recently become a living hell. So when Emma sent the first signal of actual interest on him, he knew he had to act fast. There was a void growing inside him, and darkness and despair pulsed from it in shocking waves. Yet he mastered his emotion with vampiric skill and made sure to reveal as little a reaction as possible. Kurt remained silent. His eyes followed her evasive stare as she tugged a lock of hair behind her ear. Emma's blushing cheeks betrayed her turmoil. I have a test tomorrow." One quick sweep of her hand over the table, and she gathered 2 leather-bounded books. Kurt read the spines in a flash: spells and incantations and the history of magic. Emma rose from the chair and slipped the books under her arm with much haste. Speechless by the sudden change in her behavior, Kurt pressed the napkin in his fist and stood as well. "Well, good luck," he said. Flustered, she pressed the books against her chest and furrowed her brow. "Sorry?" "The test," he added. "I hope you do well." Crisp and natural, a smile drew on her face. The gleam in her eyes spoke of her desire to stay. She took a step back, though with apparent reluctance. "Thanks," she whispered. "Bye." Where did I go wrong? Kurt mentally went through every minute of their meeting. Apprehension took over him fast. Kurt couldn't allow himself to waste this chance. He needed to win her trust, gain her sympathy, even... Ahem. Your Majesty? Drahoslav stood next to Kurt, a perfect waiter, if only in appearance. "How long are you planning to act as our personal gargoyle, standing still as you've done for the past half hour? You're beginning to scare the clientele." Kurt blinked. Half an hour? Had it been that long? He slowly shook his head. This happened to him more frequently than he'd care to admit. Kurt's mind would sometimes trail off for hours. More often than not, it traveled centuries back, to the best times of his youth, when he'd been a creature freshly born into the dark. I'm stunned, that's all," he dismissed. "I can see that," Drahoslav said with a hint of scorn, tossing the cleaning cloth over his shoulder. He waved his hand, signaling the chair, inviting Kurt to take a seat. Kurt slipped into the chair, shifting his gaze away from Latenska Street, the road that led Emma to Charles Bridge, and to her home. He'd been watching Emma closely over the past 6 months, but this task had not been limited to the Belleview Cafe. Kurt had followed her home on more than one occasion, always careful to keep his presence unnoticed. "I don't understand, Drahos," he mused, stroking his chin. "First, she summons me to her table, and the minute I arrive, she leaves. Mortals were usually drawn to him, inevitably so. It made no sense." "What is there to understand?" Drahoslav huffed. "Maybe one close look at you made her realize you're not as handsome as she first thought." Kurt rolled his eyes back. "Very funny. I'll add 100 crowns to your invisible tip." "All right. Look." Drahoslav sighed and pulled back a chair. Seizing Emma's untouched glass of red wine, he sat. "If you really like her, you can always see her tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "She has a test, remember? At school." "Were you spying on us, Drahoslav?" Kurt said with a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. "Hey, a good waiter keeps tabs on his clients," he shrugged. Kurt smiled. "Vesely Academy on Jilska Street. The school for the magically gifted." "Extraordinary creatures," Kurt corrected. "Yeah, that's what I meant," Drahoslav said with a smug look. "Be there tomorrow. I'd venture she's in the evening program, seeing how she always comes here at night." Kurt's spirit rejoiced at the sound of those words. There was hope for him still. He could make it work. Turning up at her place, unannounced, would have been ill-advised. Visiting her school is much better. He pressed the waiter's shoulder and tilted his head. "This is it. This is my one chance. I cannot fail this time." "You may not be the best waiter, but you know your trade, Drahos. I'll give you that." "Ah, Shavim." "I know," the man said, raising the glass. He considered the liquid for a second before taking a swig with great delectation. Chapter 4. Vesely Academy. Lightning struck and the ominous skies rumbled. Endless puddles of rain rippled across the academy's inner courtyard as Emma ran to escape the storm, her books clenched tight against her chest to protect them. A gust of cool wind rushed through the main hall when she burst the doors open. Every face in the hall turned to acknowledge her presence. She gave an awkward smile and closed the door with more gentleness than necessary. She tossed her hair aside to wring out the rain from it. Even though she had fled the classroom after the history test, running as fast as she could, the pouring outside had been too great an opponent. The eyes of the hall were still fixed on her, and though they seemed to stare right through her, Emma knew she was at the center of their attention. She was the odd American non-magic girl, The one who kept to herself and talked to no one. People said she was strange, but they didn't understand. Whenever she wanted to speak to one of her classmates, a tight knot built in her throat. Her heart raced and her palms grew sweaty. Why, it had taken her 6 whole months to summon enough courage to talk to the cute boy at the Belleview Cafe. 6 freaking months. But never mind that. Emma moved to the corner of the great hall. Near the fireplace, she found a spot to sit while the storm passed. "Is this seat taken?" a voice said, soft and gentle. Emma turned. A rush of warmth flooded her cheeks as she met his light blue eyes. It was him, the angel. "You? How did you—" she stammered. A subtle smile danced on Kurt's lips. With a quick pass of his fingers, he fixed his damp hair. "There's an ongoing deluge," he said under his breath, "which means no guards at the gates." "Well, how did it go?" Emma flinched, still amazed that he would have found her practically less than 24 hours after their last meeting. Many questions battled in her head. It would be impossible to choose one, but she went with the obvious inquiry first. How did what go? Emma could have stared at his eyes for hours, gleaming sapphires that caught every source of light in the room. Such serenity emanated from Kurt that it was impossible not to be drawn by him. The test. Kurt's speech was brief and to the point, his demeanor poised, calm and collected. "Oh, right," Emma slightly shook her head, ashamed of her distraction. "Okay, I guess." She gathered her hands on her lap and pursed her lips. History of magic was the subject that appealed to her the most. She was confident she would get a good grade. "Is that why you came? You must be very concerned about my academic instruction." She couldn't help a sultry tone at the end. Kurt gave the hint of a smile and lowered his gaze. "It interests me less than it probably should, I'm ashamed to say." He paused to lift his eyes. That then locked in hers. "The truth is, I'm here because I wanted to see you." "Hi, Emma," a trio of irritating voices said. The Vixens, 2 blondes and a redhead. They made sure to make everyone's life impossible, at least during their stay at school. A minor reason why she had chosen to live outside of campus. Emma's eyes met their heavily made-up faces without an ounce of expression. What did they want? The Vixens never spoke to her. They much preferred to speak about her, and often behind her back. "Aren't you going to introduce us to your friend?" "Ajka," the redhead said. "Don't you dare lay eyes on him, you wench." Oh, she could have ripped out those malicious green eyes, scanning Kurt like an X-ray machine. The blood in her veins boiled with fury. "I'm Frantiska," the tall blonde said, leaning close to him. "Are you new here?" Brigitte, the other blonde, slipped into the narrow spot on the bench's corner and jostled next to him. "You may want to choose your friends more wisely from now on," Ajka said. "Stick with us. You won't regret it." Wicked witches, the 3 of them. Wrapped in those tight-fitting uniforms with skirts so high, God knew how they managed to sit down without showing off their behinds. The Vixens had spoiled everything. Kurt would surely think less of Emma, now that he realized how awkward and unpopular she really was. It sucked, but that's life. And when... What? Why did Kurt's hand clasp hers? His hand was stone cold, but gripped her tight enough that it mattered little. Emma's lips parted, but she did not utter a sound. "I've already made the wisest choice," Kurt said as he rose from the bench, never once releasing her hand. Her cold and sweaty hand. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Mary, Sarah, Winnie." He gave a slight nod to each before opening the hall's door and leading her out of the room. Needless to say, Kurt's unexpected rebuff left the Vixens more than flabbergasted. Yes, take that, malevolent witches. A warm, fuzzy feeling spread through her body in delicious waves. This was happiness in its purest form. It had to be. As they closed the grand hall's doors behind them, Emma burst into laughter. The look on their faces, she said between laughs, while they moved through the courtyard's portico. Ajka, she nearly had a stroke. They had it coming, Kurt said, with a dispassionate tone and a simple shrug. Why did you call them by those names, though? He stopped short. Kurt gave her an appraising stare. Doubtful, it seemed. Am I to understand that you, an American young woman, are not familiar with Mary, Sarah, and Winnie, the famous Sanderson sisters? Emma's eyes flew open, and another burst of laughter took over her. Of course, the Sanderson sisters. She had seen the movie, Hocus Pocus, years ago. Oh, you truly are a bad apple. I do my best, he teased. Or did he? There was no way to tell. Kurt spoke in brief sentences and always held his composure. He rarely gave away his feelings. Without a doubt, Kurt's stoic nature made him even more intriguing. Look at that, he said. It stopped raining. And you know what that means. A twinkle of mischief sparkled in his eyes. She recognized them to be fierce as well, too unsettling, almost threatening, like a wildcat stare. Seconds before it pounces on its prey. No, she mumbled, stepping back. I don't have a clue of what it means. Had she been mistaken to follow this guy's lead? Was he maybe a little psychotic? Kurt's expression softened. He reached to hold her arm but would not touch her until she signaled her approval, which she did with some hesitation. My dearest Emma, he said. It means I get to walk you home. He's not psychotic, Emma, but rather terribly romantic. Chapter 5. The Vixens. That little minx, she thinks she can get away with this. Ajka clenched her fists, her eyes fixed on the hearth's licking flames in the common room. I wouldn't blame it all on Emma, Frantiska said. Her golden blonde curls bounced in the air when she plummeted on the sofa. The cute guy, the one sitting with her, he was the one who snubbed us. They're both hateful. Brigitte plunged the fire poker into the hearth's burning coals. They should be punished. Oh, they will be. Ajka's eyes gleamed with magic like bright embers. A malicious smile drew on her deep red lips. She turned over her open hand, and a few sparks ignited from her skin, gathering in the airspace above her palm, creating a ball of spectral red fire. There was a reason why no one in Vesely Academy dared oppose the Vixens, not even the professors themselves. Everyone knew Ajka, Frantiska, and Brigitte came from 3 powerful lineages of witches, whose soul names made skins crawl, with fear and respect. Ajka had never liked Emma. She found her shy and quiet demeanor to be no more than affectation. Her very presence irritated her, beyond belief. How can the school not see the fault of their ways? Ajka said. Admitting a non-magic girl with no respectable lineage only stains Vesely's reputation. And therefore our own, Brigitte added with a knowing tone. My parents are outraged. Rightfully so. Ajka folded her arms over her chest. The likes of Emma Summers have no place amongst us. Suddenly, the perfect vengeance dawned on her. The corner of her lips curled in a sinister smile. Ajka, what are you up to? Brigida leaned forward in her seat. Grab your wands, ladies, Ajka said. We're going for a walk. The three witches stood in the center of the common room and shared a mischievous glance before getting on with their evil scheme. Chapter 6. The Walk. The wind was delightfully cold and humid as Kurt and Emma strolled on the cobblestone street. It was pleasing, the stillness of the night, walking in silence with Emma by his side. Charles Bridge loomed a few feet ahead, gorgeous with its old gas lamps, glaring with bright amber. A low bank of fog swathed the bridge and its ominous statues. Kurt slipped his hands into his pants pockets so as to remind himself that he must remain vigilant of his behavior and reel in the pulsing need that screamed inside him, ordering him to speed things up between them. I've waited a long time for this. I can surely wait a bit more. Suddenly, Emma shuddered. She wore nothing but her school uniform, no coat to warm her in such a chilly evening. It hadn't occurred to him she might be freezing. "Ah, I'm sorry," he said, a natural reflex of the man he used to be. Kurt removed his leather jacket and placed it around Emma's shoulders. "This should warm you up." He stopped in front of her to adjust the jacket, inches away from Emma's face. She was a beautiful woman, with sparkling green eyes and pupils that were soundless ponds of darkness. Her lips were soft and smooth and gently parted as she stared at him. The perfume of youth and roses emanating from her skin entwined with the delirious fragrance of her blood, pushing Kurt to the verge of insanity. "Do it, Kurt. Don't hold back now." Voices yelled in his mind, but he silenced them again. Locked in a daze, while he contemplated her from up close, Emma's large and dreamy eyes, her blushing cheeks and tender lips, the resemblance was too striking. She was a breath of fresh air in the midst of this polluted world, a ray of light that pierced the darkness. Without speaking a single word, she had made a garden out of the forlorn graveyard of his life. Summers. The family name fits them all too well. He wanted her, and now, more than ever, he had to quiet his ardent desire. And thus, with the most painful effort, Kurt stepped back. 3 centuries had passed since the last time he'd felt such desperate passion towards someone, and that person had been a woman much like Emma. "Dearest Mary, your absence pains me more this evening than it has in centuries." "Kurt?" Emma spoke softly. Considerate soul. She would not startle him in the midst of his detachment. "Emma," he said, disarmed by her pure innocence, and contrary to what was expected of him, he added, "There's something you should know." He drew closer, surrendering to his lethal instinct. Kurt now stood a breath apart from her lips, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Yes, 1 more inch and the kiss his heart desired would be inevitable. "Aren't they sweet?" a scornful voice said in the distance. Kurt's unnatural gaze sharpened fast while he scanned the bridge, searching for that presence. He sensed 2 more as well, but had no luck finding them. This had to be magic. True magic was the only way to fool a vampire. "Such a cute pair," another voice taunted. It came from a different location. The presence then shifted elsewhere. Kurt pursed his lips. He grew tired of these wicked games. He stood at the center of the bridge, his keen senses fully aware of the witch's shifting presences. They'll look cuter when we turn them into toads. A cackle followed this last remark. The voice was all too familiar. Kurt caught a glimpse of red hair swaying in the wind. It soon dove back into the fog. Everything was clear now. Now, Winnie, he said through clenched teeth. You don't want to mess with me tonight. But then, out of thin air, Brigitte materialized in front of Kurt. She stared at him with defiant eyes and sneered. In a flash, Kurt reached to seize Brigitte's throat. But as he did, the woman vanished right before his eyes, and he found himself grabbing no more than cool air in his tight fist. Laughter echoed in the dark. It was all a trick, smoke and mirrors, nothing more. Is this the extent of your magic? Parlor tricks? He challenged into the night. Please leave us alone, Emma said, running to catch up with Kurt. Not until I've cursed you and your lover boy. Ashka spoke somewhere in the fog. Kurt knew it wouldn't end up nice for the three witches. His thirst for blood pulsed hard inside him now. It only increased the more they taunted him. Had they no idea who he was? But they were young and new to the world of magic, no matter how spoiled and vicious in their craft. Suddenly, Ajka, the real Ajka, materialized before Kurt, glowing wand in hand, ready to strike the final blow. Kurt's lips parted. His sharp canines slowly dropped as he prepared to seize his prey, yet before he could widen his mouth to throw the witch a menacing grin, someone pushed him aside. Don't you dare touch him, Emma said, now standing between him and Ajka. She raised her left hand and flashed her open palm at Ajka, while the two other witches appeared behind their coven's leader. Kurt should have ended things right then, but his interest was locked on Emma. On the way, her hand now gave a faint glow as she softly repeated the words for an incantation. A flickering light burst from her palm, like the flash of an old photographic camera. The embers danced in the air and slowly gathered into a ball of spectral blue fire. Will you look at that? Brigitte said, notoriously surprised as the blue gleam reflected on her corneas. The girl knows magic after all, Frantiska clapped mockingly. It's a pity she's figured it out so late. Ajka raised her wand, confident as she stepped forward. Is that the best you can do, Batich? This did not sit well with Emma. Did you just call me bitch? She said through clenched teeth. The spectral ball of fire, hovering before Emma's hand, suddenly buzzed and fizzled. In a matter of seconds, its brilliance dimmed and disappeared. A painful realization struck Kurt then. Emma has magic, but she has no control over it. He had to act fast. Kurt needed her alive. The Vixen's eyes beamed with darkened joy, as Emma's struggles to rekindle the spell failed miserably. Like birds of prey, Aika, Frantiska, and Brigitte closed in on Emma, wands gripped tight in their merciless claws. I will destroy each one of them before any harm falls on Emma. Determined to go for the kill, Kurt lunged forward, only to find himself locked in mid-air, suspended somehow in time. Dark velvety feathers fluttered before his baffled eyes, and a sense of absolute lightness overcame him. No, not this. Not now. Everything went black. Chapter 7. The Guardian. The freezing touch of marble against Kurt's cheek reinstated his awareness. His eyes slowly opened. Darkness surrounded him. It took Kurt a few seconds for his preternatural eyes to adjust to this reality. The air was surprisingly thin, and so pure that it cut through his lungs as he inhaled it. This was not Earth. In the dark, he caught a glimpse of multicolored beams of muted light, filtering inside through elaborate mosaics of stained glass. Everything became clearer now, despite the jarring atmosphere. The ribbed vaulted ceilings, the slender marble columns reaching upwards to meet the large lancet windows. Pointed arches framed the central nave where he lay, wide and long and eerily empty. He sat on the floor. This place reminded him of Notre Dame Cathedral, so vast and intricate with ornate details. Why am I here? Kurt's fingers glided through his short mane of ashen blonde hair. He reached the back of his head where a faint pain pulsed. Images of his last memories suddenly flashed before his mind's eye. Emma. The bridge. The witches! Light footsteps drew near. The faint sound echoed in the great hall. Finally, you're up. The voice grew loud as it reverberated in the cathedral, while still retaining absolute clarity. This man, where was he? Kurt narrowed his eyes, sharpening his gaze until he distinguished the figure standing in the shadows at the end of the central nave. The ominous silhouette stretched both arms to the sides. A quick snap of his fingers, and a burst of fire ignited a strain of iron braziers along the nave. Pair by pair they grew alight, spilling a pond of flickering amber that soon reached the mysterious man. As the blaze illuminated the man's face, Kurt discovered his gray large eyes, chiseled lips, strong jawline, and jet-black hair. "Drahoslav," Kurt said through clenched teeth as he slowly rose from the floor. He should have imagined this was all his doing. Who else would have even considered bringing a vampire into the house of God? "What is this place? Why did you bring me here?" he all but hissed. Kurt tightened his fists, sweeping the area with a quick glance, searching for any signs of an exit. "You left Emma alone with those witches. They'll destroy her for sure." "What the hell were you thinking?" Drahoslav's expression stiffened. His eyes gleamed a powerful white light. Behind him spread a grand set of slotted wings, their silken black and gray feathers rustling in the air, white tips reaching each side of the central nave. It was an imposing sight, the fury of an angel. Kurt's breath hitched, and although he'd never admit it to anyone else, a hint of fear made his heart shudder. "Hell?" Drahoslav asked pointedly. "You dare mention the lair of the damned in my holy fortress?" Drahoslav took a deep breath. Little by little his anger subdued. His brightened eyes dimmed until restored to their human appearance, and his wings lowered and gently folded back behind him, creating a soft breeze that swept a mesmerizing fragrance of myrrh and sandalwood towards Kurt. The guardian moved forward. "I saved you from imminent danger, Kurt," he said in the lowest of voices. "You do well to remind yourself that my allegiance falls with you and your lineage alone." He paused. "I owe nothing to that woman." Drahoslav's spiteful words made every nerve in Kurt's being alight with contempt. "You call yourself the servant of a loving God, willing to embrace all creatures that fall under his creation," Kurt muttered, stepping forward. "Yet you leave a helpless woman to the claws of monsters. She will die. Don't you understand?" Despair tinged his last words. For the first time in his damn life, Kurt was powerless to change his fate. The guardian stopped a few steps away from Kurt. Such indolence radiated from him, such absolute detachment, that it only inflamed Kurt's anger and frustration. "I do not pretend to equal myself to the Almighty," Drahoslav feigned a sigh. "Only He can judge my flaws, if indeed there are any." It was the classic pretentious reaction of an angel. "It shouldn't surprise me at all," Kurt mumbled, lowering his gaze. Angels are heartless creatures. Drahoslav pouted like a child. For a second, his semblance became worth capturing on canvas by Raphael Sanzio. I'm sorry you feel that way after 1,000 years of my loyalty to your lineage. He shrugged his shoulders. Kurt's fierce eyes pierced Drahoslav through and through. You call it loyalty, he whispered. I say it's a debt. Kurt moistened his lower lip with a quick pass of his tongue. The idea crossed his mind. What would it be like to kill an angel? But he dismissed the whole notion in an instant. How could he leave this place without Drahoslav's help? No, a more subtle approach would be required. We must go back, Drahos, he said, in a less rebellious tone. Yet the fierceness lingered on. We must save Emma. You will forgive my angelic discipline. Drahoslav gently bowed, stepping back. My oath bounds me to prevent your escape. He paused to read Kurt's face with an appraising stare. I will release you when it's safe to return. It shan't be too long now. It's her they want, after all. A devastating truth about guardian angels had become clear to Kurt after 500 years of his vampire existence. They were dispassionate creatures, detached from all earth-binding matters. Angels regarded their protégés as mere assignments. They couldn't care less for anything else. You're welcome to try to stop me, Kurt said. But I will leave this place, whatever it is. I'll find a way. The guardian pushed up his leather jacket sleeves, revealing the intricate writings tattooed on his forearms. Ancient symbols, not of this world. He took another step back, while fidgeting with the golden signet ring around his finger. This place is my holy sanctuary, Your Majesty, Drahoslav said, with arms open in a gesture of magnanimity. We are suspended in another dimension, a world between worlds, so to speak. He waited for Kurt's reaction to his revelation, but he gave him nothing. There is no way out, if not by my hand. He slowly bowed his head. I see, Kurt mumbled, smoothing a hand over his lips. All efforts are useless. Drahoslav's delicate lips stretched in a bizarre attempt of a smile. I'm glad we've reached an understanding. The room rumbled as he spread his wings once more. A single flap raised him 5 feet off the ground. A second swing elevated him into the vault's shadows, where his figure disappeared from Kurt's sight. Pain struck a hard blow to his heart. Kurt's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, burying his face in his hands. Oh, sweet Emma, he sobbed. I've waited centuries for you, and now I cannot help you. I wish with all my accursed being that you may survive. Chapter 8. The Bronze Army. Kurt, where are you? Emma scanned the bridge. Stricken with dread, her heart raced, her breathing quickened. No trace of him. He'd simply disappeared. A violent gust of wind had rushed past her, disheveling her hair and clothes. She thought she'd seen a shadow traveling in the air, but it had moved so fast she'd barely been able to make out anything that resembled a silhouette. The dark mass had reached over 8 feet high, as it quickly enveloped Kurt's body, wrapping him in darkness, vanishing within seconds. What have you done to him? She demanded, clenched fists slightly shaking. Ajka, Brigida, and Frantiska were heartless harpies, capable of unspeakable evil. The 3 witches stared at the open space where Kurt had recently stood, spiteful and full of contempt before. Their eyes now gleamed with unmistakable astonishment, and even a hint of fear. This was not their doing. That sudden realization sent a chill through Emma's heart. If the Vixens had nothing to do with Kurt's disappearance, then who took him? Where is Kurt? Looks like your hero ran away, Emma. Frantiska cackled, shedding away her prior reaction. Green light sparked from her wand, and with it, she drew a broken heart in the evening sky. Then she laughed some more. No, Emma said. Kurt wouldn't do that. Face it, Emma. Ajka scorned. Prince Charming turned out to be a coward. We don't want him anyway. Brigitte snapped her fingers, generating red embers that condensed into a ball of spectral fire. We're here for you, Emma. Emma's mouth went dry, heart pulsing hard in her throat and ears. She took a hard swallow. One quick look at her clammy hand confirmed that the few sparks of light flashing from it wouldn't build up into a magical fireball. I'm toast. I think you're out of magic, Emma. Ajka taunted, stepping closer while pointing the menacing oak and silver wand at her. Ajka, please, don't. It's too late now. You're dead. Ajka swished her wand, drawing a circle in the air. Vaporizo! A bright green bolt of light sprung from the wand, creating a blinding arch in the air. It twirled twice in the sky before redirecting its course and heading straight to Emma. Emma's body trembled with dread. A sudden tingling spread from her core to her arms, reaching her fingertips quickly. Waves of warmth flowed and ebbed through her entire body. What's happening to me? Unable to contain the burst of warmth radiating through her every pore, Emma fell on her knees. White light emanated from her skin and engulfed her in what appeared to be a protection sphere, all sounds from the exterior, then muffled, and nothing but a low buzzing sounded inside. Ajka's bolt of lightning struck Emma's magical sphere and dissipated into fading sparks immediately. Inside this magic bubble, Emma was safe. The sphere's faint buzz soon merged into words. It was a woman's voice. Magic flows in your blood, the voice said. Release your power, Emma. Say the words. Magic streamed through her fingers, powerful as contained lightning, waiting to be free. Say the words, the voice insisted. Emma slowly got on her feet. She turned her hands over, with open palms facing upwards. And even though the power was too strong and overwhelming, she took a deep breath and gathered enough courage to chant the incantation. Circumfusum mihi servo meo. It was a simple spell, the one that came to mind. That which surrounds me protects me. She repeated the words, this time with increased confidence. And when she opened her eyes, Emma saw the gaping mouths of Ajka and Frantiska. Brigitte ran to seek shelter near the bridge's parapets. Lightning surged from Emma's hands, spreading into 1,000 arches that at once struck the bridge. The earth shook hard with the might of a powerful quake, and she watched with baffled eyes as a chain of explosions burst out of the stone statues, dust and debris filling up the foggy air. No trace of the Vixens remained. A deafening silence followed. Emma held her bearing as the earth shook once more, but this time it did it with a paced rhythm. Giant footsteps drew close to where she stood, each step rumbling the ground with powerful blows. Her eyes fixed through the cloud of dusty fog to the center of the bridge, nervously eager to discover what was headed towards her. Wailing screams ruptured the unnerving atmosphere. The Vixens' voices, not proud or abusive, but squeamish and in pain. A chill dropped down Emma's spine. Ominous shadows emerged from the fog. Then she saw. Emma's eyes flew open. The statues! They're alive! Effigies of St. Barbara, St. Margaret, and St. Elizabeth walked with menacing steps. Emma found herself incapable of moving. pinned to the ground in a daze. The statues stopped inches away from her. Their expressionless eyes were vacant as they turned to face the clearing fog on the bridge. Screams of horror traveled with the wind. Ashka, Frantiska, and Brigida's voices clashed into an unsettling melody. The fog pulled back into the river, a suspended mass of intangible magic. And as the road became visible again, Emma's appallment only grew at the scene that lay before her. The Vixens had fallen captive to the mighty statues of St. Christopher, St. Ludmilla, and St. Luthgard, locked in their lethal hold, seconds away from being tossed into the Vlatva River, where the fog had now turned into a stream of shadows, with black-clawed hands that reached out to meet their prey. It was a fate too hideous to consider, yet she had summoned it unwaveringly. Perhaps she had not cast the spell with due intention, but the magic had stemmed from the depths of Emma's heart, and that truth was undeniable, no matter how terrible. "Emma, please," Brigida cried, pinned to the parapet by the statue of St. Luthgard. "Don't kill us," Frantiska winced in pain, trapped in St. Christopher's hold. "Emma, you must tell them to release us," Ashka said, her voice infused with sizzling anger. "What?" Emma asked with a frown. "What makes you think I have any control over them?" "Give them the order!" Ajka screamed as the statue of St. Ludmilla tightened its grip around her waist, ready to squash her like a bug. With military precision, St. Barbara's imposing bronze body made a sharp turn and knelt before her, expecting Emma's command. This is really happening. The extent of Emma's power overwhelmed her. The Vixens had treated her badly from day one at Vesely Academy. They deserved to be punished. Throw them into the river, she wanted to say. But wouldn't that be exactly what a Vixen would do? Emma bit her lower lip. She glared at the Vixens, their horror-stricken faces, their bodies wobbling under the statue's hold. Indeed, they should get their comeuppance, and they would, but not this way. "Spare them," Emma whispered, heartbreak tinging her voice. "Spare them all." St. Barbara's statue rose from the ground. The statue raised an arm, passing the command to the others, and once it remained clear that no bloodshed would take place, the statues released their vindictive prisoners, which met a hard blow as they fell to ground. Ajka, Frantiska, Brigida crawled on the bridge, sobbing as they hugged each other, thankful to be alive. The ground rumbled as the statues returned to their positions on the bridge, and just like that, the dust settled, the river dissipated its darkness, and the magic cycle ended. Struggling to make sense of all that had happened this evening, Emma hugged her arms, slowly lowering her head as she walked past the Vixens, paying no mind to their words of gratitude. Where did this magic come from? Who was the woman who'd spoken to her earlier? But beyond her desire to unravel these mysteries, all her thoughts turned to Kurt. I must find him, but how? Chapter 9. The New World. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Lost, in a new town laden with haunting tales of demons, Kurt sought shelter in the deepest darkness of an old forsaken barn. Stories of a town swamped with witches had lured him to the new side of the world, to a small village in the colonies. Vampires got bored so easily. After 200 years of darkened solitude, a trip to the new world had seemed more than appealing. And despite the myriad complications such a voyage would imply to someone of his nature, in the middle of the 17th century, Kurt had been willing to endure them all. A great Spanish carrack, called the Gran Carolina, had taken him to the new lands. Life in the colonies had proven most pleasing. Kurt killed and drank their blood, delighted in the purity of their innocence. Blood drinkers had yet to take over the area. Unlike their Eastern European counterparts, Americans would hardly recognize a vampire if they ever met one. But the night was spent. Kurt had no time to seek a lair. The stables would have to do, even if there was someone else inside them. Kurt's preternatural eyes fell on a young woman of no more than 17, with fair freckled skin, pale blonde hair, and reddened cheeks and lips. Tears slowly rolled down her face. The woman quietly sobbed, her anguish all but tangible to his unnatural senses. Before he realized it, Kurt rose from the hay-covered ground, drawn by the girl's exquisite lament. He reached her without making a sound, and stood a few steps behind her, witnessing her sorrow. "Why are you crying?" he asked, his voice low and detached, driven by curiosity, more than compassion. The woman's shoulders jittered, startled by his presence. She looked back, and her wide and bloodshot eyes fixed on him. It was then that Kurt realized that underneath the hurt and pain, there was a subtle layer of anger in her gaze. Her eyes, also, revealed to him another hidden truth. "Who are you?" the woman said, jumping on her feet. Clearly concerned for her safety, she stepped back. "You mustn't be afraid of me," he softly said, a hand slightly raised, suggesting her to be at ease. "I am merely a traveler seeking shelter, a place where I may rest for a while. Are you unwell?" This time, the question was heartfelt and sincere. The woman, hesitant to give him an answer, bit her lower lip and lowered her eyes. "I understand if you'd choose not to share your misfortunes with a stranger in the stables," he added, using the same soothing, velvety voice. "But I assure you, my intentions are honorable. I only mean to help." It surprised him to discover his feelings' authenticity. It was nice behaving as a gentleman for a change. He was ready to give up, when the woman suddenly stepped forward, still cautious, as she swallowed hard, and moved into a faint beam of moonlight. "My parents disowned me," she said. "I have no place to go." Kurt leaned against a stack of bales of hay. He slipped his hands into his pants pockets as he captured every detail of the woman's face, alight with a mournful glow. "Why would they do that?" he asked, but his mind trailed elsewhere. The woman was beautiful, yes, but there was more to her than what met the eye. "They accused me of heresy." Her expression stiffened. The highness of her jaw and neck muscles spoke of her contained fury. "All because I used some herbs to heal my younger brother's sickness. They said I was a witch." With a more relaxed posture, Kurt tilted his head to one side. He gave the woman an appraising stare. "Your parents spoke the truth," he said, slightly raising his chin. "You are a witch." The subtle blue gleam in her eyes was but one of the many signs that revealed her wicked identity. The witch held her breath for a few seconds. Kurt's observation had surely shocked her. However, she managed to appear untouched by his words. "And you are no traveler," she said with a knowing tone. "You're a blood demon." Kurt couldn't help but smile. It was refreshing being able to speak with someone free from pretentious lies. I can see how it might be a challenge, being a witch in a town full of witch hunters. She nodded in silence. "Then we must leave," he added. The witch's eyes flew open. "We unnatural creatures must aid one another." A blood demon helping a witch, she whispered, shock looming on her countenance. That is without precedent. Kurt's lips stretched in a warm smile. I gather I've seen enough of Salem, he said under his breath, and you're the best of it. Kurt would not fool himself into believing he cared nothing for the woman's fate. Something about her had compelled him from the start, a silent kinship between them, powerful as if preordained. And this feeling had not been the product of any spell or enthrallment, for magic between two unnatural beings cannot go undetected. My name is Mary, the witch said. Mary Summers. It's time for us to leave this town, Mary, Kurt said. Would you not agree? Slowly, he offered his hand to her. Blood rose to Mary's cheeks. Her eyes gleamed with magic. For a quick second, without speaking a word, a shy smile danced on her lips, and Kurt's heart raced beyond control the minute her hand folded around his. It's time, Your Majesty. Drahoslav's voice brought Kurt back from his detachment. Immortality played the most terrible tricks on vampires, but sometimes those vivid memories brought solace to his mourning heart. Is she alive? He was afraid to ask, but did so anyway. The guardian nodded. A deep sigh escaped through Kurt's lips. This cannot wait another minute, he said, getting on his feet. Get me out of this place, Drahos. Chapter 10. Nothing Personal. Part 1. It was early in the morning when Emma returned home, weary from the fight at the bridge and ignorant of Kurt's whereabouts. The minute she plummeted on the sofa, she fell into a deep slumber. Evening had taken hold of her living room when she opened her eyes. A shadow stood out from the pitch darkness of the room. As she gained focus, the tall and slender silhouette of a man became clearer. He was dressed in black clothes, and beneath his hooded face, a faint smile appeared. He seemed so familiar. I've watched over your sleep, he whispered. His eyes gleamed in the dark. He took a step closer, and his face emerged from the shadows into the pool of moonlight that filtered through the bay windows. Kurt! She jumped off the sofa and ran to his arms, already expecting her for a welcoming embrace. Emma swept him with a quick glance. You're all right, she said, relieved, heart beating hard against her chest. Kurt drew back his hood, revealing at last the pale blue-eyed face of the teenage boy she held so dear. Yes, I am. I'm happy to see you again. Alive, that is, he whispered, while tucking a lock of hair behind her ear. I'm sorry I disappeared yesterday like that, but I wish you could have seen what happened. It was incredible. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, she said, loving the overwhelming sense of protection his embrace conveyed. The statues, the ones on the bridge, I brought them to life. Or at least I think it was my doing. Of course it was. Kurt's fingers dipped into her blonde hair and stroked it with great fondness. Your ancestors' magic runs through your veins. My ancestors? Emma frowned. She parted from him enough to study his expression, cold and brooding. What do you mean by that? She had to ask. Her only living relative was Auntie Lisa, and she was everything but a witch. Emma, there's something you must know, he whispered with a vacant gaze. I am not human. You're a vampire. I figured as much, she said dismissively. Kurt narrowed his eyes. How did you... For 6 months I've watched you at the Belleview Cafe. You always order a cup of espresso, but never once have I seen you drink it. Shifters and warlocks attended Vesely Academy, but not vampires. They were forbidden to mingle with students because of some stupid old law. So what if Kurt was a vampire? Why should that matter? Emma held his hands. Kurt's skin was hard as marble and freezing like a block of ice. "Your hands are so cold," she said, gently pressing them to give them warmth. "They are, most of the time." Kurt pulled her hands close to his chest. "Especially when I haven't fed, and I am rather hungry." Emma bit her lower lip. The mischievous sparkle in his eyes concealed more than one mystery. She wanted to discover everything there was to know about him. In this nearness, she would have conceded to Kurt's every whim. "Kurt, I think—" "Shh." He pressed his thumb against her lips and gently ran a hand beneath her jawline. "Don't think." He moved one step closer, narrowing the distance between them. Emma's heart pulsed hard and fast, every beat throbbing in her throat and ears. She had dreamed of kissing Kurt's smooth lips ever since she'd met him at the coffee shop. Every Friday night for 6 months, Emma had walked past the gargoyles guarding Vesely's gates, crossed the stone bridge as darkness fell, and settled into her usual spot at Belleview Cafe. She told herself it was to study, spreading her books across the table. Fundamentals of magic, basic spellcraft, mastering your inner power. But really it was to see him. Watching Kurt each week, she'd begun to suspect that maybe there were more powerful forces in the world than magic. The way he moved with liquid grace, how his presence seemed to draw all the light in the room. She'd never seen anything like it. When Kurt leaned closer, his lips grazed her neck. His icy breath landed on her skin, sending a freezing wave crashing through her every limb. Screw it. The vampire's kiss was imminent now, and Emma welcomed it, no matter the consequences. At that moment, she didn't care if Kurt's immortal kiss could kill her. Every fiber in her being screamed his name and longed for his touch. However, something gnawed at her. "Kurt?" "Yes?" he whispered in a husky voice that made her shiver with excitement. "How did you know where I live?" He remained silent. The sharp edge of his fangs brushed her skin, instigating her to forget every single unsettling thought that wandered in her brain. "I'm a vampire," he said. "We have our ways." Kurt's hands traveled lower and glided to the small of her back. Closing his grip, he carried her to the sofa, where their bodies entangled at last. Emma surrendered to his wishes, wanting more of his anxious caresses, desperate for the taste of his lips. "Kiss me, Kurt. Why haven't you kissed me?" The weight of his body pressed against hers clouded her judgment, but failed to silence yet another question brewing in her curious mind. "Kurt?" He gasped, clearly annoyed. "What is it?" "You spoke of my ancestors' magic," she said. "What did you mean by— Ow!" Kurt's keen canines sank into her neck without warning. Sharp as stylets, they pierced the skin, but true pain came when they ripped the underlying muscle layers deeper still until they scratched her carotid artery. Kurt's lips sealed the small wound. His tongue quickly swept up the pouring blood. Warm as it leaked from her neck, the pain disappeared, and a burst of adrenaline now pumped through her veins. Kurt's unnatural appetite aroused her. Emma's hands, though somewhat numb, went to his chest in an attempt to remove his shirt, but Kurt seized them fast. "Emma Summers," he whispered in her ear. "You ask too many questions, but I'll give you the answers your heart so desires." Her arms tingled, as if pricked by 1,000 needles. The feeling soon receded, and a sudden lightness took over her body. How much blood did he take? It was only as she tried to sit, that Emma realized she had no strength left to move. "I am no ordinary vampire, Emma." Kurt removed himself from her and stood by the sofa. "My family history goes back entire millennia, to the times of my brethren's origin. My father declined his right to the vampire throne, and in all generosity offered it to me, his youngest offspring. I would have been a fool to refuse. Thus, for the past 5 centuries, I've ruled over our brethren in the Eastern European lands. What do you have to say about that?" Emma's eyes widened. She forced her tongue into speaking, but it did not move. Like her body, it was completely paralyzed. What had he done to her? "Oh, that's right. You cannot speak," he taunted. "It's the venom in my bite. Don't worry. This will be over soon." Chapter 11. The Runaway. While Emma lay on the sofa, numbed beyond repair by Kurt's poisonous bite, the immortal mind game played its final card on him. In a flash, Kurt traveled centuries back to the accursed town of Salem, to the barn where he and Mary had planned their escape and prepared to leave as dusk set on the horizon. "I've taken care of everything, dear Mary." Kurt's fingers stroked her cheek. "The carriage awaits. Come, let us leave this town to its judgments, and its dead to their graves." Mary smiled for the first time since they'd met, and her happiness filled his immortal heart with a warmth he'd long forgotten. Kurt pressed her hand and led her out through the farmhouse's rotting doors, and off they went, deep into the night. "There," he pointed in the distance. "Across this field, there's the carriage. See the light?" "Yes, I see it." Mary's radiant beauty only increased with her joy. Had he not the certainty that no spells could be cast between vampires and witches, Kurt would have thought he'd been spellbound by this wonderful woman. Quite unexpectedly, Mary stopped in the middle of the field. "Mary," Kurt said, tugging at her hand. "Mary, we must move." Her eyes gleamed a spectral shade of blue. The magic residing inside her stirred, igniting an ethereal luminescence. Kurt then read absolute happiness on her countenance. Mary's excitement beamed off her skin in pulsing waves, so bright it was almost blinding. She stepped close to him, framing Kurt's face with her delicate hands. She suddenly leaned towards him and pressed her warm lips against his. Stupefied as she gently parted from him, Kurt's eyes flew open. Mary?" He was at a loss for words. "There's no need for you. Do not feel obliged to." A soft smile bloomed on her lips. "You've been so kind to me," she whispered. "But this kiss is not born from gratitude, Kurt. Indeed, you have stolen my heart. I can say with all certainty that no one has ever loved me in my whole life as you have loved me in these past few hours." Kurt's accursed spirit swelled with joy. The sole touch of her lips had quickened his blood, instilling new life into his undead heart. He took her hand to his lips and kissed it with unbridled devotion. "We'll build a life of our own," he said, "away from the ignorance of men, in a land where people fear and respect our kind." Kurt sighed. "Mary, you've brought me back to life. Yours is my heart and my polluted soul. It's all I have to give. That is all we need." Mary smiled, but her smile soon faded, and her eyes filled with horror as a horde of shadows emerged from the field's tall grass. In an instant, dozens of men armed with pikes and torches surrounded them. Fear shimmered in their eyes, but that which was paired with stern determination. Shadowed hands gripped them like claws, seizing them fast, preventing all possibility of escape. No, she screamed. Please, don't. The crowd split in half, opening a path for an approaching pair of mortals, a man and a woman, old in age, their trembling hands armed with pitchforks. The old man stepped forward. That's her. His crooked finger pointed at Mary. She's the witch. Father, don't do this. Take her, cried a man in the crowd. No! Kurt freed from their pathetic hold and ran to her, ready to bare fangs and leave a scene worthy of butchery in this wretched field. Mary! Kurt, listen to me. Her voice, collected and serene, sent chills down his spine. Whatever happens, you must live. She dipped her hand into her apron and extracted a small gullet knife. In a flash, Mary seized Kurt's hand. She slashed her palm and did the same to his. Mary then clasped both hands and closed her eyes, whispering an ancient chant he could not understand. A bolt of light sprung from their hands and shot up to the heavens. Cries of horror spiked from the fearful mob. She truly is a witch. Look, she deals with the devil. Mary faced her accusers with indomitable pride. What is done cannot be undone, she said victoriously. Then, turning to him, she added, Bring me back, Kurt. Only you can do it. Take her, Mary's father said with a quivering voice. And seize him. He's with her too. Run, Kurt, a tearful Mary said. Run! Chapter 12. Nothing Personal. Part 2. Is it done, Your Majesty? The voice emerged from the shadows. Who else is with him? Why is Kurt doing this to me? Emma would have screamed, but by now her body had turned into stone. Only her eyes moved, so she gave one quick sweep to the room. However narrow her visual field had become, she perceived the approaching silhouette. Man, over 6 feet tall. On his back, he carried something, a backpack, maybe. Almost Drahoslav. Drahoslav? What was the Belleview Cafe's waiter doing in her apartment? Kurt knelt by her side. His light blue eyes loomed over her as he gave her a furtive smile. I know a lot about you, and even more about your family, Emma. He pressed her shoulder and rose from the carpeted floor. You were born in Austin, Texas, lost your parents to a car accident at the young age of 6. You were then raised by your Aunt Lisa and have lived with her ever since. Until, he made a dramatic pause, you received a scholarship, all expenses paid, to one of Prague's most prestigious academies for the magically gifted. I believe she gets the idea, Drahos said, moving closer. Does she? Kurt ran his fingers over his chin. I don't think so. Right, she doesn't. How the hell did he know so many details of her life? You see, I brought you here, dearest Emma, Kurt said. I was there the day you were born, and isn't it poetic? I'll be there on your last day alive. Kurt, what's wrong with you? Why are you acting like this? I thought you cared about me. He stopped in the middle of the room and turned with a look of surprise as if he'd listened to every single word in her mind. Could he? Listen? But I do care about you, Emma, he said. You matter more to me than you think. I followed your life every step of the way, anticipating this exact moment. But let me explain. My connection with your family began over 3 centuries ago, in Massachusetts. Massachusetts? Oh, that's your family's true origin. Didn't you know? He raised his brow. 1692. A small town is turned upside down because of an outstanding number of witchcraft accusations. Salem? I can tell you've gotten the hint. He winked. I was a young blood drinker with a taste for adventure when I met Mary Summers, a young girl of 17. And yes, she was also your ancestor. I've never met a more endearing creature. You look so much like her. Kurt's fingers caressed her cheek. Don't touch me, you bastard. He got the message and stepped back. Mary was accused of witchcraft by her own father, he said with a vacant gaze. I couldn't save her. An ignorant mob hung her at daybreak. That was how I lost her forever. Or so I thought. Can we do this now? Drahoslav said under his breath. The minute he drew closer and stepped into the pool of moonlight in the room, that's when she saw wings. Drahoslav's wings extended several feet wide, imposing black and gray feathers, smeared white on their tips. Is he an angel? Has he come to save me? Yes, of course, Kurt said. He then turned. It's nothing personal, love. I need her back, that's all. Darkness spread as the shadow of Drahoslav's ominous wings embraced her. That was the last thing her mortal eyes would ever see. Chapter 13. The Belleview Cafe. A peaceful atmosphere stirred in the evening. Gray clouds smeared the pitch-black sky, and soft gusts of wind, moist and cool, announced the impending snow. No longer did Kurt skulk at the table in the farthest corner of the Belleview Cafe. There was no more need for secrecy. He found much pleasure in sitting at a table near the terrace. From this angle, he could capture the passing hordes of tourists, but his eyes lingered upon a much better view. 300 years is a very long time, she said. The world has changed. She had changed, with eyes no longer tinged in blue, but a bright shade of green. She studied every corner of the city from their privileged spot at the coffee shop. It has changed. Mankind has become more lenient to our existence. But no matter how magnanimous their growing sympathy, each century passed painfully and slowly without you. He finished with a humble smirk. She twirled a lock of blonde hair around her finger, and her iridescent eyes gleamed. It was worth the wait. You chose well, she said, while staring at her reflection in her pocket mirror. She has my eyes. And your smile, he bashfully added. An uncomfortable moment of silence brewed between them. Poor Emma, he said under his breath, lowering his gaze. I cannot help feeling sorry for her. It's sad, really, the way things ended for her. Mary folded his hand over his. You have the noblest of hearts, my love. For that alone I adore you, she said. But Emma was weak. She was innocent, he suggested. She was foolish and naive enough to trust a vampire of whom she knew so very little. So did you when we first met, Kurt gently pointed out. That was different. Frazzled, Mary shook her head. You cannot tell me you'll allow this guilt to linger, not when it was her body that led me back to you. Kurt's warm gaze landed on her. Mary's demeanor was somewhat detached. Perhaps her time in death had distanced her from human emotion. But then such sudden apprehension had loomed on her words. He'd spotted fear in that voice, silently telling him, Do you regret bringing me back? Listen to me well. He pressed her hand. I could regret nothing that remotely added to having you in my life once more. I feel pity for the girl, that's all. And you have my word, my heart will not linger on this feeling, for there is a greater one that outshines it. "And what feeling is that?" she whispered, her eyes glimmering with hope. Kurt gave her half a smile. "Need you ask this of me?" he said. "I thought it would be clear by now." "I want to hear you say it." "It's love. The most powerful bond that ties me to you as I've never experienced before." He paused. "I love you." A smile danced on Mary's lips. "You kept your promise, my love. I knew you would not fail me." "I'm glad I didn't." Drahos arrived at the table. He tossed them a pair of espressos. The cups danced in circles over their small porcelain plates and splashed a few drops before becoming still. "What's wrong with him?" She scowled. Kurt leaned closer, seeking her confidence. "Bringing your soul back might cost Drahoslav his wings. He's upset, maybe even frightened." "He stole it. He should be afraid." She stirred the small cup clasped between both hands. "It's none of our concern. Let him deal with it." Kurt's hand reached for hers, warm and delicate. "All I care about is that you're back. I've missed you dearly, Mary." "Shh. You mustn't. You must call me by her name. Call me Emma. I am a slave to your bidding. You know that. But I'm afraid I cannot obey you. Not in this instance. I must speak your name. I've waited long enough for it." "Oh," Mary sighed. "It's true. Centuries went by in a blink for me, while you faced them alone." She pursed her lips. "You may call me as you wish. I spent centuries chasing your bloodline's trail, but I would do it again and again, as long as it led me to you, my beautiful love." He gave a quick tug to her hand until it touched his lips. Beneath this kiss, he smiled. The 21st century was but the beginning of a lifetime together. This time, there was no reason to run. This was the fresh new start denied to them all those years ago. At last. "To a long and happy life together," he said, raising his steaming cup of coffee to eye level. "To the first of many centuries to come." She raised her cup with a flash of mischief in her gaze. Kurt's preternatural eyes widened in astonishment. "Does this mean—" He frowned. "Have you decided to take part in my world?" "Only if you ask me properly," she mused. He rose from the chair, and holding her hand, Kurt got on one knee. Gasps of excitement escaped an encircling crowd at the cafe. "Mary Summers," he said. "Will you be my queen for all eternity?" Blood rushed to her cheeks and tinged them pink. "I will." Rounds of applause echoed in the coffee shop, wave after wave. Loud cheers followed the unfathomable moment so many mortals had just witnessed. If only they knew. Kurt glided his hand over her jawline and drew closer to steal a kiss from Mary's lips. She welcomed the kiss with a smile, and as he slowly parted, pressing his cheek against hers, Kurt spoke into her ear. "Together, my love, we will rule over our kin. The fear inspired by the undead will rise once more, and mortals will long for the days when they lived life so ordinarily." Epilogue. Drahoslav. I have watched them from afar, my charge and his newly awakened queen, as they plot humanity's downfall over cups of untouched coffee. The irony of their romance does not escape me, a tale centuries in the making, sealed with innocent blood and hellfire. My hands tremble slightly as I serve their espressos, a strange emotion I cannot quite place. Something has changed within me since I helped Kurt reclaim his lost love. A heaviness settles in my bones, a dull ache that pulses with each breath. Perhaps it is merely the weight of what I've witnessed, what I've done. The cafe bustles with mortal life around us, patrons laughing and chatting, completely unaware of the darkness that sits in their midst. Mary, now wearing Emma's face like a borrowed gown, catches my eye as I turn away. Her smile holds no warmth, only triumph. She knows what this has cost me, this theft of her soul from hell's deepest chambers. For centuries, I served as Kurt's guardian, bound by an ancient oath to protect his lineage. Never did I imagine that duty would lead me to this moment. The bell of Vesely Academy tolls in the distance, and something inside me responds. Sharp, burning sensation between my shoulder blades that steals my breath. I steady myself against the counter. Confusion flooding my senses. Every nerve ending seems to have awakened, bombarding me with unfamiliar feelings. The chill of the evening air bites at my skin. The scent of coffee and human sweat overwhelms me. My heart, my immortal, unchanging heart, thunders in my chest like a war drum. What is happening to me? Through the window, I catch my reflection. My eyes, once luminous with celestial fire, appear different somehow, duller, more human. A wave of vertigo sweeps through me, and for the first time in my existence, I feel truly afraid. Kurt raises his cup in a mock toast, his preternatural eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. He knows something I don't, something about the price of stealing souls from hell. The Academy's bell tolls again, its pristine sound piercing through me like a blade of ice. Each chime seems to diminish something within me, as if the very essence of my celestial being is slowly ebbing away. My immortality bleeds out with every ring, replaced by sensations too raw, too human to comprehend. Strange tremors ripple through my body, each one more disorienting than the last. The very air feels heavier, as if gravity itself has intensified its hold on me. Never before has existence felt so substantial, so finite. My reflection shows me a truth I'm not ready to accept. Whatever transformation has begun, I know with crushing certainty that my service to Kurt, my sacred duty as guardian, has led me down a path from which there may be no return. The Academy's bell tolls one final time, and with it comes a knowledge that settles in my bones. This is not the end of my story, but rather a beginning I never saw coming. Welcome back. Now you've witnessed my fall into darkness, how duty and an ancient oath led me to commit the gravest sin, stealing a soul from hell itself. But this was merely the beginning. If you dare to follow my path, join me in the Soul Thief, where in the haunted halls of Vesely Academy, I discover that sometimes the greatest acts of faith require us to fall. In my darkest hour, when divine light has abandoned me, I find something heaven never prepared me for, a love worth any price. Until then, I'll be waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
This path is shrouded dim in haze. Echoes whisper my name and pray. I tread where ancient shadows lay. In stillness mysteries replay. Tell me where my heart belongs. In corridors of silent songs. Candles flicker in the midnight air. Range in tones hold secrets we all wear. Winding halls where spirits dwell. of mystery, right in this realm of mystery, right in moonlit libraries, dots on slow, stories written in ink of the old.